hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
My name is Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 12 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Dark Island.
Alternative title is Roop. There it is.
That was wonderful, Phil. We're very proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
We do meet Lord Roop in this chapter, in this very frightening chapter.
This is probably the scariest chapter so far. Well, the dragon one is pretty tough too, but this is a different level.
And the Magician's book had some quite frightening things in it as well. But you're right. In general, this is a pretty ominous chapter that we have here.
Forget, is Narnia a Christmas series? Or is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe a Christmas movie?
Is it a horror series?
Yeah, is this a horror series?
I don't know. Well, Phil, we need to go ahead and jump in. There's so much to unpack here on the Dark Island. Last episode, we left our good friends, yours and mine. We love them so dearly. The Dufflepuds, we left them in the Magician as the Dawn Treader continued setting off towards the east. And then we pick up here with chapter 12. You've got that chapter summary. Take it away for us.
All right. The Dawn Treader sails toward a land that turns out to be a misty darkness. The crew almost unanimously wants to turn around and head back, but Reepicheep convinces them to continue on for the sake of honor and adventure. So with lanterns raised and weapons drawn, they continue their approach, immersing themselves completely in the mist. Suddenly, a terrified voice calls out to them from the surrounding darkness. Once brought on board, a man proceeds to tell them to row away in the direction they came, as where they are is a place where horrible dreams come true. Struggling to escape the darkness, despite everyone's fervent rowing, the crew begins to descend into despair. But when Lucy is wise enough to cry out to Aslan, a beam of light appears along with an albatross that guides them to safety. Looking back, the darkness is gone, and the crew rejoices.
Very nice. I feel like this was probably an easier chapter to write a summary on than these last few ones we've had.
No.
Really?
Yeah.
What was so difficult about it?
Well, when I first started out, I had read the chapter once, and then I was rereading it and writing the summary at the same time. And I thought, this will be pretty easy. They are sailing, there's some darkness, and then they have some conflict, and then they get out of it.
That's what I would assume.
It's maybe 4 sentences, 16 words total. And then I was at, I think, 168 or 170 something. And I thought, okay, so a little bit more happens here than I thought. And I had to trim away quite a bit, but
well, good. What were some of your takeaways?
Ended up right at 150.
Very nice. What were some of your takeaways?
I love the way the mist is described, the terror we feel from the crew, and the conflict with Reepicheep once again being the voice of reason, and well, not really the voice of reason, the voice of bravery, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What were your
I disagree.
takeaways?
I can't wait to talk about it.
Oh, really?
A little bit.
Well, this should be some good conversation.
You know, one of the things that stuck out to me as I read this, been preparing for the show, is the sense of dread that follows this entire chapter. And that's not the way that these adventures have gone so far. Usually, they show up at an island, there's this sense of excitement, something goes wrong, and then we have to fix it, and then we go sail to the next place, and it's fun every time. With this one, it's not that way. And so I liked that we have something new here, especially because we are nearing the end of this book. It's really hard to believe it, but this is chapter 12. There's only 4 chapters left after this.
Right.
So, Phil, let's dive into the text here. We start off, I'm sure you enjoyed this. The crew of the ship, they're clear skies ahead. Things are going well. They're playing chess.
No birds, no fish.
No birds, no fish. Yeah.
What were you saying about chess?
I just knew they were playing chess, and I know you're a big chess fan. So
yeah.
I feel like you always feel like that's a personal shout out from Lewis to you.
I do.
What was standing out to you in the beginning of this?
I thought it was interesting that Edmund is the one who sees land first, or what they thought was land. I'm curious if that was his job or if he just happened to be up there. The more I read, the more I'm interested in the mechanics. Like, I don't even know if I fully understand just how large the crew is, and I'm curious how they eat. Like, what are they? If they're out there, this says on the 13th day, Edmund saw what they thought was land. I'm curious what they eat when they're on a ship for that long.
When it says there's no fish, right? And so they're not catching
fish
off the side
they're
of
not
the
eating
ship.
Birds.
I think we have to assume they have quite a few stores below deck, right? Food they've taken from some of the other islands, or
maybe the magician hooked them up. We don't know.
oh, maybe that's it. Yeah. And so I mean, there's definitely ways they're feeding themselves. I'm interested as well too in. I want to know more of what happens during these days between the adventures.
It's just a lot of chess.
You think it's just a lot of chess? That's the Narnia series we need on Netflix.
Right.
Don't adapt this actual book.
It's a series of 36 games played over 13 days.
Yeah. Just adapt the days outside of the real adventures. Oh, that would be very fun to see, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's like Seinfeld. It's this TV show about nothing. Right. It's about nothing on a ship. Well, pretty quickly into this chapter, you were right. Edmund does see this black mist, and no, it's not the green mist from the movie. Never mind. You don't even know what that is, do you?
I was excited to see this for about 2 seconds, and then I remembered this was something you complained about in the movie.
Well, no, this is not the same green mist from the movie.
Oh, really?
Well,
they had to change it for the movie.
I don't want to talk too much about it because you haven't seen the movie, and we're going to cover the movie eventually, obviously. But there is some going back and forth where this does kind of relate to one another in the adaptation, but this mist is not what this green mist is in the movie. It's not the same thing.
So it's 9 a.m, and then very suddenly it was so close. So it seems like it snuck up on them that the mist is right in front of them. And
this dark mist.
What it really is there's a point where there's no more light. And as they actually get close to it, you can kind of see that it's similar to being near a tunnel is how it's described, where there's just an absence of light there.
Which is really odd.
Right.
Everybody should be freaked out in Narnia. I know they have, fauns and all these other kind of magical creatures, but just this giant darkness ahead, even for them, seems to be abnormal. This is not a regular Narnian occurrence.
Right.
There's a lot of discussion over what we should do. Or I say we as if I'm on the ship. There's a lot of discussion of what they need to do.
You are immersed in this story.
I'm really feeling it. My imagination is going wild right now. Caspian's, he's like, what do we do? Drinian says it's not his advice that they go in. A lot of people are agreeing. Edmund says, I almost think he is, when he says the captain. So, again, this is how the exchange goes. Do we go into this? Asked Caspian at length. And not by my advice, said Drinian. The captain's right, said several sailors. I almost think he is, said Edmund. And this is such an interesting exchange here. Is Edmund just trying to not play sides here because he doesn't want to be wrong? Is he just kind of sliding Caspian? Why does he respond this way?
I feel like Edmund is afraid, but he also knows that they need to go into it for some reason.
So this is a mature statement from him, not an immature statement.
Yeah, I think he's acknowledging the fact that when Prince Caspian says, is it King Caspian now?
Yeah, King Caspian the 10th.
When King Okay.
What? Sorry, that's his title. Sorry. He has a longer one, too. Do you want to hear the whole thing?
Let's hear it.
I don't know it.
Okay. I just wanted to call your bluff. I think that Edmund is aware that he wants to not do this, but he also feels like he should, and this is his way of expressing that.
No, this is great. I really like your take here because it's very different than how I originally read this. I was finding Edmund to be not a little nervous here and not wanting to take sides, or just I got a sense of immaturity from him. But as you say that, I actually like the way that you're reading this better. Edmund, throughout this whole story, has been a very quiet leader. He has not jumped into the front of all the decisions. He has let Caspian lead while also still carrying this weight of leadership and just presence behind him. And so this is Edmund almost saying, I almost think he's right, but still allowing Caspian to make this decision. He has the maturity behind him to not be the one who has to make every single decision. He's okay standing behind the current King of Narnia, even though he is King Edmund the Just.
Right.
Right here in my book, I have an incredible Pauline Baines illustration. It is of the Dawn Treader going into this dark mist. I'm assuming that this is what you have. It's the... Oh, no. Phil has...
I'm even borrowing Daniel's copy, and I still don't get to see the pictures.
This is actually quite odd. The picture that you have just shown me does not show up in my Kindle
Oh,
version.
really?
No.
Well, see, the thing about buying the print book is you just get access to some different illustrations.
Well, I will definitely have this
Once
one.
out of 7 books.
Yeah, I will definitely have this one in the.
Oh man, go to the show notes, guys.
Yeah.
This illustration's a treat.
Check this
That
one
is
out.
really good.
The color, the dark greens there. I
Oof.
think this is in my top 5.
That is
It is a great illustration. I posted it over on our Twitter, and it really is a phenomenal job that Baines has done. And so as I was reading this chapter and I got to this illustration, I moved to the next page in the book, and this image was right there, and it drew me into this story.
Yeah.
More than many of the other illustrations have. That's not a knock on them, but
It's just this one was particularly good.
I mean, it was moving. It was frightening. It was ominous. I even felt this sense of desperation. So let's go back to the Dawn Treader, and your friend, Reepicheep, is not happy about this situation. Tell me about that.
So no one wants to go into the darkness, and Reepicheep wants to know why not. He asked anyone, he said, "Will someone explain to me why not?" And I love this line. This is a great example of how to lead people, even if you're the size of a mouse. And he says, "If I were addressing peasants or slaves," he said, "I might suppose that this suggestion proceeded from cowardice. But I hope it will never be told in Narnia that a company of noble and royal persons in the flower of their age turned tail because they were afraid of the dark." And that is just straight to the heart of a group that wanted to go on this adventure and is terrified, and he just really calls him out.
So it's here in this conversation that Reepicheep also tells us exactly what the purpose of this voyage is. In response to Drinian, he says this: "If by use you mean filling our bellies or purses, I confess it will be no use at all. So far as I know, we did not set sail to look for things useful, but to seek honor and adventure. And here is as great an adventure as I ever heard of, and here, if we turn back, no little impeachment of all our honors." Some of the sailors, they don't care that much about honor. But right after this exchange, Caspian, he says this very interesting thing in response. "Oh, bother you, Reepicheep. I almost wish we'd left you at home. All right, if you put it that way, I suppose we shall have to go on, unless Lucy would rather not."
And we all know what Lucy's going to say.
And we have to imagine that Caspian knows what Lucy is going to say. And so why does he defer to her here?
I felt like it was a last-second chance. Where it's like, if you don't want to go, we can cancel this whole thing right now. And it's just kind of like a one-shot. Maybe she'll say no, and then we can all go home and don't have to deal with this. But
so this is
work.
not deferring to her out of respect.
No.
This is, I really hope she says no and takes the blame for this.
I really think that terror has gripped him, and he's not saying things like he usually would. This is kind of like a lower part of his brain going, is there anything else we can do to get out of this? But he also, the higher brain's still working. He knows they need to go.
Yeah, I mean, and Caspian's a still pretty new at being king, and so he's not going to be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
So let's enter into the darkness. I've got a long little section to read here. Lewis really is captivating in his prose. With a creak and a groan, the Dawn Treader started to creep forward as the men began to row. Lucy, up in the fighting top, had a wonderful view of the exact moment at which they entered the darkness. The bows had already disappeared before the sunlight had left the stern. She saw it go. At 1 minute, the gilded stern, the blue sea, and the sky were all in broad daylight. Next minute, the sea and sky had vanished. The stern lantern, which had been hardly noticeable before, was the only thing to show where the ship ended. In front of the lantern, she could see the black shape of Drinian crouching at the tiller. Down below her, the 2 torches made visible 2 small patches of deck, and gleamed on swords and helmets, and forward there was another island of light on the forecastle. Apart from that, the fighting top, lit by the masthead light, which was only just above her, seemed to be a little lighted world of its own floating in lonely darkness. And the lights themselves, as always happens with lights when you have to have them at the wrong time of day, look lurid and unnatural. She also noticed that she was very cold. How long this voyage into the darkness lasted, nobody knew.
What an incredible description of that darkness and its effect on everything, even the way light interacts inside it.
So much weight is in this paragraph. I read one extra sentence past that paragraph. So much weight is there. And I even just love the diversity of sentence structure that Lewis has here. We have really short, punchy sentences like, she saw it go, to really long ones with breaks and pauses.
And lots of description.
Yeah.
And even the way that ends, the paragraph itself ends, she also noticed that she was very cold. It's that last little detail that you thought it was bad, and then you also have that sense of cold, which I don't think it's it's wintertime kind of feeling. This is 9 a.m. in the morning, and it wasn't cold, and now it is. All of a sudden, because of this darkness, and it's a pretty deadly combo.
It's frightening and nothing's happening. Like that's what's scary.
It's the anticipation.
And yet, out of nowhere comes a scream.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the worst thing that could happen right now besides just, the ship sinking.
Right.
Because, and it goes into what makes this chapter so frightening, the scream could be anything or be caused by anything. And that's why it's terrifying. I mean, a sea serpent just showing up like we've had before would almost in some ways be less terrifying because at least you know what it is.
Yeah.
We have no idea what this scream is. I mean, we've all experienced this before, right? In the middle of the night.
Where you're sailing on a ship, and then you hear a scream, and everything's dark.
We've all experienced.
Listeners, write in if you too have experienced a blood-curdling scream while on a ship in the middle of the
You know what I mean. Well, maybe you don't. What I mean is the middle of the night, it's quiet in your house, and you hear a sound.
I thought you were going to say a scream.
No, not a scream.
There's only one other person here.
No, it's not a scream. You hear a sound, and you're like, what is that?
Right.
And it's usually nothing. But it's very frightening. I can't imagine what it's like in the middle of this darkness on this ship to hear the Lord Roop, because that's who it is, hear his blood-curdling scream.
Yeah. You thought you were scared before, and then it's confirmed that there's something terrifying going on.
And Reepicheep, with all of his honor and courage, he calls out. Who is that? And he has such... Do you want to read what he says? It's incredible.
Who calls? It piped. If you are a foe, we do not fear you. And if you are a friend, your enemies shall be taught the fear of us.
Which is... it's an intense threat.
It's pretty bold.
And the response is a cry for mercy, a cry to be saved, and to not leave this voice in this horrid land, according to his own words. He's quickly brought on board, and we learn that this is the Lord Roop. Before we go into what all of this is, I have one question for you, Phil. Is there an actual island here, like a physical island?
I was just thinking about this. When they later turn around and see nothing, which we've covered in the summary, so it's not a spoiler.
No, yeah, that's fine.
When they turn around and see nothing, I'm curious if everything's gone. And if there was land when Roop was on there, because land is in dreams at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever this darkness is, it can create anything that it needs. So maybe I don't think he was in the water necessarily.
But wouldn't he have to be in the water? Because I know the John Treader is not a large ship. We've been told many times it's of a smaller variety. But, I mean, how close would this ship have to get to land to be able to bring him right on board? He's already soaking wet, and we hear that he's swimming over to the ship. And so, I mean, we've all been on boats before, and it's not like you can go right up to the land and have someone just climb up. In a boat this size, it still has a significant portion of it that has to be below the water. So, I mean, how shallow is the water? How does this work?
Right.
When I picture this, although it is a very dim picture in my mind, it is him in the water without land. I can't figure out how these things match up. I mean, we've made it very clear that we are novices in pretty much everything we do here, including our ideas of sailing. I just can't figure out how this works. In my opinion, in my imagination, I should say, he's holding on to some piece of wood or the door from the Titanic. Maybe that's what he's on right now.
That's
And
a really good point.
And
Yeah.
we know from the movie it can only fit one person, so
Right.
that's how no one
And
else
you
survived.
can't let go.
Exactly. And then maybe off in the distance is an island. He says, "Leave me in this land. Don't leave me in this horrible land." So it has to, and the chapter's called The Dark Island. I assume there's some kind of island somewhere, but maybe he is far enough from that island that he's able to be picked up by the Dawn Treader here.
Yeah. I'm also curious how long he's been there. I don't know if we'll find this out later, but if he's been there a while, or if it's like a time portal type thing where he feels like he's been there forever, but it's only been a few minutes to the rest of the world. And
Well, we know he's been gone from Narnia for a long time because this is before Caspian came to the throne that these lords left.
so is he just eating dream food, or there's so many questions. I don't want to get too much into it, but it does get your mind thinking, like, how could this be? But to answer your question from before, I think that now that I think about it, I've been picturing him treading water and then coming up to the ship.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah, I was just wondering because
Or maybe he was on the island and then he got in the water.
And this is something I would actually like to hear from listeners because so little detail is given here. I'm sure that many of us all have different ideas of what's happening here. So listeners, I'd love to just hear, what are you picturing when you read this in chapter 12, or when you were growing up reading this, or when you read it as an adult? How are you imagining this encounter occurring? So, but let's move on because this is the Lord Roop. We found another one. Again, I really am feel like I'm in this story with my pronouns today. I'm a part of this too. Were you surprised to find one of the 7 lords here?
It did surprise me. It makes sense now that I think about it, but this does seem like a place that one could lose themselves in.
So after a quick conversation here, we learned the truth about this place. And, Tolkien really was not a fan of when Lewis put in a lot of different mythologies into his work. And so I want to know how he thought about the inclusion of Disney World here.
Because this is the one place where dreams really do come true.
You pick up very quickly. Yes, we learned that this is the place where dreams come true. And so the response at first is what you and I would probably respond with if we are thinking more of a Disneyland, Disney World type scenario, as some of the sailors do as well. Oh, I was married to Nancy if we landed here, as one sailor says. One guy wants to find Tom alive. There's a little bit of excitement before there's a rebuke from the Lord Roop, who calls them fools and says, "Do you hear what I say? This is where dreams, do you understand, come to life. They come real. Not daydreams, dreams." And then everyone loses it.
Yep. They start hightailing it out of there.
Here's what Lewis writes. There were about half a minute's silence, and then, with a great clatter of armor, the whole crew were tumbling down the main hatches quick as they could and flinging themselves on the oars to row as they have never rowed before. And Drinian was swinging round the tiller, and the boatswain was giving out the quickest stroke that had ever been heard at sea. For it had taken everyone just that half minute to remember certain dreams they had had. Dreams that make you afraid of going to sleep again. And to realize what it would mean to land on a country where dreams come true. That is an incredible paragraph. It is so important, the response that the sailors have here. And it's a powerful moment because how much are we like these sailors?
Oh, yeah. I was right there with him.
Excited to learn that some of our greatest desires might come true. And how wise these sailors are to quickly realize how destructive their dreams or desires can be. Now, obviously, this is taking it a step further. But I think about this in our lives. How many times are desires in my life, especially as a Christian, are those desires actually destructive if I really chase them to their fullest extent? Right? And the sailors aboard the Dawn Treader, they only need half a minute to figure this out. I'm almost 30, and I feel like I rarely ever get this right. However, I wonder what is motivating them here. Is this wisdom or is this fear? And fear and wisdom can go together. The book of Proverbs, King Solomon talks about that a lot. But is this a fear based out of wisdom, or is this a just fear of the unknown? I think either way, they're making a good choice to
Right.
leave.
Yeah.
But what's the motivation for leaving here? What do you think?
I do think it's a combination of fear and wisdom. They're afraid of their wise realization. They're afraid of what they're realizing could happen if these dreams had come true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that everyone thinks of the good dreams, but they didn't consider the bad ones. And as soon as they do, they're getting out of there so
They are.
fast.
So as every man aboard the ship is rowing for their lives, there is one mouse who is not.
He
And-
remains unmoved.
And this is where I think you and I disagree. You mentioned a little bit that at the beginning of this chapter that Reepicheep is the only brave one here. Was that what you were referring to? Was this moment right here?
No, earlier.
Oh,
when,
the
when they
first
went
one.
into the darkness.
Okay.
Oh,
Let me see.
good. I was afraid we were going to have a conflict.
Oh, yeah, I thought we were going to fight. This
No one
might be
wants
the
to
end of the
hear that.
show. So we would both agree that Reepicheep is being kind of stubborn here.
Yes, this feels more like earlier when he just wants to go ahead and challenge everyone to a duel.
And you and I are in good company because Brown agrees with us as well. Here's what he writes. I have sometimes wondered, friend, whether you do not think too much about your honor. In the voyage of the Dawn Treader, and his longing for something greater than honor at the place where sky and water meet, in his command, don't fight, push, during the sea serpent episode, and in his willingness to allow Lucy to go upstairs alone at the magician's house, readers have seen a more mature Reepicheep. But like all of Lewis's characters, the noble mouse does not become perfect after Aslan's correction, only better. Lewis adds a realistic touch here in chapter 12 as we find Reepicheep again thinking too much about his honor.
So he has changed, but he's not completely perfect. Similar to Eustace and Edmund. We still see glimpses of their past selves.
And this is so important, especially in children's literature. I spend a lot of time reading kids' books, like a lot. And one of the things that authors often fall into is thinking that the idea of a round character or a dynamic character means they're just going to change one time, especially with dynamic characters. I see this all the time in books. The character starts one way at the beginning of the book, and by the end, they're very different. They go through like the whole Eustace episode.
Mm-hmm. But that's it.
Yes. But Lewis, he always adds a touch, almost kind of like, the stock market kind of graph where it has its ups and its downs, but it's tending upward maybe, right, as you would hope. But it definitely has ups and downs, and that's what we have from Reepicheep here. He has some other good decisions at the beginning of this chapter, and then here, this really seems like foolishness from him to want to stay. It's clear that this is not a place they need to be, and yet out of his arrogance or desire for honor, he kind of says some mean things. Well, it's my good fortune not to be a man, right?
Right. And he uses certain words like mutiny and poltroonery.
And this isn't a mutiny. That's a really bad take by Reepicheep here.
Because Caspian's right there with
Yeah,
him.
it's not a
rowing.
mutiny when everyone's on board with it.
Precisely.
Well, things aren't getting better. They're getting worse and worse, and people are really losing it. 5 minutes pass, which is the amount of time that it took them to get into the darkness.
Right.
And
They realize they're still not out of it.
they're seeing no light. And everybody's starting to realize, wait a second, we're not seeing any light. I would say this is maybe the lowest point that the crew has been at the whole book.
The sounds that they're hearing don't help either. And pushing
read
them,
some of those.
It's pushing them to the limit. Someone says, I think Eustace says, do you hear a noise like a huge pair of scissors opening and shutting over there? Which...
That doesn't sound that terrifying. I'm not on board with that one.
I understand where he's coming from, but I think the key is that it's a giant pair of scissors. That does sound terrifying. And the interesting one is the gongs beginning. I knew they would. And then it's just going to settle on the mast, said Caspian. And everything is intentionally vague here, I think, when Lewis is writing it, because it leaves it up to our imagination. What in the world are these people talking about? But they're terrified, so it must be scary.
What are these pronouns stand for? What do they
Right.
mean?
Yes.
And so it is at this moment of deepest despair in the crew that we go to Lucy. And 3 books in, it makes sense that we would go to Lucy here. And I'm going to read what Lewis writes. Lucy leant her head on the edge of the fighting top and whispered, Aslan, Aslan, if ever you loved us at all, send us help now. The darkness did not grow any less, but she began to feel a very, very little, better. After all, nothing has really happened to us yet, she thought. Look, cried Rhinef's voice hoarsely from the bows. There was a tiny speck of light ahead, and while they watched, a broad beam of light fell from it upon the ship. It did not alter the surrounding darkness, but the whole ship was lit up as if by searchlight. Caspian blinked, stared round, saw the faces of his companions, all with wild, fixed expressions. Everyone was staring in the same direction. Behind everyone lay his black, sharply edged shadow. Lucy looked along the beam and presently saw something in it. At first it looked like a cross, then it looked like an aeroplane, then it looked like a kite, and at last, with a whirring of wings, it was right overhead. It was an albatross. It circled 3 times round the mast and then perched for an instant on the crest of the gilded dragon at the prow. It called out in a strong, sweet voice what seemed to be words, though no one understood them. After that it spread its wings, rose, and began to fly slowly ahead, bearing a little to starboard. Drinian steered after it, not doubting that it offered good guidance. But no one except Lucy knew that as it circled the mast, it had whispered to her, Courage, dear heart. And the voice, she felt sure, was Aslan's. And with the voice, a delicious smell breathed in her face.
Wow. I'd rather enjoy Aslan's delegating this to an albatross. How cool is that? He's not even there, and they still get to benefit from their relationship with him.
Is he? Is he not there?
Well, he's in bird mode.
There is a lot of thoughts on what's happening here.
Yeah.
It sounds like what you were saying is Aslan has delegated this.
Yeah, I'm half joking, but
I know. No. You've made your bed. Is there any idea in your mind that this is Aslan himself?
there was not, to be honest, there was not.
Okay.
But for you, you think it was?
This is Aslan.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that this is Aslan.
You
As
don't
an
think he's
albatross.
phoning it in?
I don't. I mean, it's my opinion. It is not. I don't think it's actually clear, but that is what I believe.
So in your mind, Aslan is a bird.
I think he can be anything he wants to be.
That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, you and I had the pleasure to meet Dr. David Downing when we were in Montreat last fall. And into the wardrobe, he writes this: Aslan is not a tame lion, and sometimes he is not any kind of lion.
Oof. That's so good.
So me and Dr. Downing are on one team. You can be on your own team over there, buddy. But no, I do believe this is Aslan. I think hearing his voice through the albatross to me, and we know that Aslan is capable. He's not even existing inside of time. We just learned that a couple chapters ago. Yeah, of course he can become an albatross. But you believe that? I mean, it doesn't have to be him. So
No,
you're
now that you explain that, I do think that when you said that Aslan doesn't even have to do anything, he doesn't have to be a lion necessarily.
Sure.
That's great. Yeah. And the timepiece just sends it home where he's not playing by the same rules.
And this encouragement that he gives to Lucy is one of the most famous quotes in all of Narnia. Courage, dear heart.
To me, it's such a gentle, firm, and bold reminder.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucy she feels this immediately. She says, nothing's really happened yet. And we have a reminder that Aslan's there and he's going to take care of it. Now, maybe it doesn't look the way everyone would think, and there's going to still be hardship, but he's still there the entire time.
Once the albatross leaves, pretty quickly the Dawn Treader comes back out. It makes its way out of this darkness.
Yeah. So I'll read from right after the albatross leaves. In a few moments, the darkness turned into a grayness ahead, and then, almost before they dared to begin hoping, they had shot out into the sunlight and were in the warm, blue world again. And just as there are moments when simply to lie in bed and see the daylight pouring through your window, and to hear the cheerful voice of an early postman or milkman down below, and to realize that it was only a dream, it wasn't real, is so heavenly that it was very nearly worth having the nightmare in order to have the joy of waking. So they all felt when they came out of the dark. The brightness of the ship herself astonished them. They had half expected to find that the darkness would cling to the white and the green and the gold in the form of some grime or scum.
I'm really glad that you are reading from that physical copy there. You have a copy of, was that 1970 edition?
1952,
No,
but
that's
this
when it
was
was
published in
Yeah.
It's copyright 1952, but published in 1970.
So 1970. And some of our listeners might not know this, although I'm sure many do, that what you just read can no longer be found in editions of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Really?
Post 1994 editions do not say that. Here's what they say instead. In a few moments, the darkness turned into a grayness ahead, and then, almost before they dared to begin hoping, they had shot out into the sunlight and were in the warm blue world again. And all at once, everybody realized there was nothing to be afraid of and never had been. They blinked their eyes and looked about them. The brightness of the ship herself astonished them. They had half expected to find the darkness would cling to the white and the green and the gold in the form of some grime or scum. And then first one, and then another, they began laughing. Now, we alluded to this at the very beginning of the season, but Lewis rewrote this paragraph. And a couple little other parts at the end of this chapter, we're not going to touch on them as much. This is the biggest one here. Really interestingly enough, in 1994, all of the editions reverted back to the previous one, which is the one that I just read. And I just read it from a modern Kindle. And so it's only American books published before 1994 that have these words in it. And if you couldn't hear it the first time, if anyone wasn't familiar with the first time, it added in these few sentences. And just as there are moments when simply to lie in bed and see the daylight pouring through your window and to hear the cheerful voice of an early postman or milkman down below and to realize that it was only a dream, it wasn't real, is so heavenly that it was very nearly worth having a nightmare in order to have the joy of waking. So they all felt when they came out of the dark. Why do you think Lewis added this sentence?
It certainly brightens the mood a little bit faster. Do you think he was trying to balance out the chapter as a whole?
I think that could be some of it. Before I did any research or anything, I was really intrigued by the pronouns here. Lewis almost turns to us and says, don't you know what this is like? Don't you know what this feeling is like? And then, conversely, there is not the line of, there was nothing to be afraid of and never had been. And it's so interesting. And as I was reading about the ideas of a lot of different scholars, the one that stood out to me the most was Peter Shakel. Here's what he wrote. The reader cannot, and he's referring to the revised version here, the reader cannot dismiss the island as unreal or as no longer existing. It is still there, and anyone who can get to Narnia still could get caught in it. More important, the inserted analogy with its second-person pronouns draws readers into the episode and evokes in them the same emotions the characters experience. This is no laughing matter, as the earlier version risks making it. Really great perspective from Dr. Shakel. And again, I think we just tell, my big takeaway from all this is stop buying newer books. We just got to keep buying the older
Buy
books.
the old ones, which you did.
Which I did, because not only are they in the correct order, but now they also have what Lewis wanted to be here in this spot.
Yeah.
So I don't think it really changes the entire chapter. I don't think the sky is falling if you have a newer version. But it's a pretty significant change that it's odd to go back to the original version when Lewis himself was the one that revised it.
Yeah.
And I would point listeners in the direction of Dr. Shakel's book, The Way into Narnia, which is where that is from. Lots of great ideas there, not just in regard to this little chapter.
Yeah, that was really good.
So, Phil, that's about where the chapter ends. They continue to move on. The albatross has disappeared. Nobody notices it, but it does disappear, which is, again, to me, another illusion. Remember how Aslan kind of sneaks off at the end of Wardrobe? It's kind of the same thing with the albatross here.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up our time together?
I am hoping the next chapter is a bit of a break from all this stress.
Before we leave, I want to ask you one thing, which is, do you believe the Dark Island ever existed, or was it destroyed?
I think that it was destroyed in those people's minds because they had hope and they got out of there.
Okay.
But I think it still exists if other people go back.
Okay, interesting.
How about you?
I don't know. That's why I asked you.
Yeah.
I think it's still there. I don't think it's been defeated forever. I think there is this psychological aspect of it that it's not maybe necessarily a physical place in and of itself. But yeah. Well, Phil, I know you were hoping that things are going to get easier, but I got to tell you, next chapter, we have chapter 13, and it's called The Three Sleepers, and it's really the beginning of the end, which is the chapter after that is the beginning of the end of the world. But no spoilers. But we're here. We're in the home stretch of this season, and it's only going to get more intense, in my opinion.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you'll love it.
Well, in terms of enjoying a story, I think that'll actually be pretty fun.
But you have to stop after each one. I think these last few chapters are going to be very hard for you to put the book down.
Yes.
And you've got to do it for listeners' sake.
This happened both with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, even though I had read it several times, and Prince Caspian. It's really difficult to not just finish the whole thing.
What are you going to do when we get to the last battle and you're like in the penultimate chapter and you have to stop for the sake of the podcast?
Hey, I'll do it for our listeners.
Yeah. Well, before we go, we do have an email to get to here.
This is from April. Hi, Phil and Daniel. I've been listening to the show ever since it came out, and I absolutely love it. And it has been my intention to write you for a while now. As we are now approaching the end of Dawn Treader, and alongside with it, some of my favorite scenes in the whole series, I thought I might as well do it now. I really love the Magician's Book chapter, and was very happy to hear you list all the reasons why you liked it, because that's something I have never quite been able to put into words. The bit with the story you can read once has always broken my heart a bit, and it's so refreshing to see a glimpse of Lucy's faults and inner conflicts in this chapter. It makes her a much more compelling and human character on the whole. She is my personal favorite, and I've always been amazed by Lewis's ability to convey so much meaning, so many feelings and deep, deep reflections with so little, such as in that single line about how no one would notice Susan anymore after Lucy read the spell. All of his writing feels to me like a pond that looks shallow on a first glance, but there is so much to discover and learn once you really dive in, and I very much enjoy doing it alongside with you. I'm so excited for what's to come, especially in regard to the sun imagery, but other than that, beginning now, this book only gets better and better, and I can't wait to hear what Phil's got to say. I wish I could read it again as if it was my first time. Thank you so much for doing this amazing podcast. It is always delightful to sit down and listen. You leave me with such a rich pondering to engage in at the end of every episode. Keep it up. Further up and further in, April. All the way down from Argentina. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I like that I got a specific call out.
You love that. Whenever
hey man, if you keep this up, though, you'll get a call out too someday.
Oh, hush. Yeah, April, thank you so much for reaching out to us. I, too, just like you, look forward to hearing what Phil thinks in each episode. That's usually my favorite part of sitting down to record, is wondering, what's Phil going to think about this?
Yeah.
And that's what I look forward to a lot. And I can't wait to hear what he thinks about the end of this book. I think it's going to be a really fun experience for all of us. So again, April, thank you so much for reaching out. And I think it's time to wrap up the show, right, Phil?
Let's go.
All right, well, this episode was made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes out to Elias Dean, Madeline Heising, Hannah Anderson, and John Marr for supporting us at the Care Paravel level. Follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. If you have any feedback, email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We'd also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other listeners find the show and join in on our read-through. Also, make sure if you haven't subscribed, to go ahead and do that in your favorite podcast app so that you can wake up every other Wednesday to a new episode. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 13.
See you then.